It is a pleasure to be back with you this morning in this beautiful valley, which we call home. We are grateful for the rain, of course, and for the water which nourishes and feeds and brings life to our soil and our animals. And yet we also hold in prayer those who are adversely affected by this onslaught of needed water. This place where we sit is the perfect geography for Lent. For during this particular church season, we sit between two mountaintop experiences. The Sunday before Lent was Transfiguration Sunday, where Jesus was on top of a mountain and he was changed, if you remember, in the presence of Peter and James and John. And at the other end of our Lenten experience, we have the resurrection. We're not going to go there yet. During Lent, we walk this lonesome valley, attentive to growth and deep reflection about our own relationship with God. As a friend of mine likes to say, in Lent, it really is all about you. The Gospel of John, which Jana has just read, is known for its convoluted writings and sayings. Most scholars believe that this particular gospel was written by committee. And as committees go, the telling of a story can often be obscured by the committee's desire to make a point. And as with many committees you may have served on, there's a wide variety of ideas about how any particular point should be made. So this gospel reading is no different. If you found yourself scratching your head and your thoughts getting wound around between being born from above, being born of water and the Spirit, and in the end not really being sure of what Jesus is saying, then you are in good company with Nicodemus. Notice that Jesus even teases his confused student and says, "Are you a teacher of Israel, and yet you do not understand these things?" So let's talk a little bit about Nicodemus. Who is he? And why is he skulking around in the dark with Jesus? The story takes place in Jerusalem, where the temple sits as the official center for Judaism for the entire area. Nicodemus, we learn, is a Pharisee, a scholar of the law, who is skilled in understanding and arguing the finer points of the law. Nicodemus is also a member of the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish body with governance over religious practices and daily lives of Jewish peoples. In Jerusalem, at that time, Nicodemus would be a man of stature and highly regarded for his intelligence. He also happens to be a man who seeks Jesus. In the dark of night, Nicodemus finds him and addresses him as Rabbi, thus acknowledging that Jesus is a religious teacher. Now, normally, when people approach a rabbi, it is with a question. They are seeking wisdom, they are seeking interpretation and understanding. But Nicodemus comes to Jesus with this statement. Jesus' actions and miracles or signs can occur only because of Jesus' unusual connection with God. And then that is followed by the head-scratching sequence, where Jesus 3 times starts a sentence with, "Very truly I tell you," a phrase indicating that Jesus is honoring Nicodemus with instruction about certain truths that he may not share with others. And then as the narrative continues, Jesus states a theological idea that one should be reborn from above. And Nicodemus is stuck on the practical impossibility of that idea. Wait, does one enter the womb again? And how does one do that? That is Nicodemus's conundrum. But let's back up for a moment. It is interesting that Nicodemus seeks Jesus in the cover of darkness. Of course, it is likely true that a man of his position would be afraid to be seen with Jesus. And yet there is something that's driving Nicodemus past his fear. There's something compelling Nicodemus to go out in the dark of Jerusalem, that dark night, and find Jesus. That same drive, that compelling drive experienced by Nicodemus, is what a monk named John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. Living 1,500 years after Jesus' earthly ministry, John of the Cross was a contemporary of Teresa of Avila, and he was one of her confessors. John would sit for hours on the steps outside of Teresa's cell in her monastery in Avila, and the contrast between the two of them was notable. While Teresa was a restless spirit, John of the Cross was a contemplative poet. And together, their exploration of spiritual life and mystical experiences has gifted us with a big body of writings, a wealth. And while Teresa wrote about her relationship with God in a more narrative and sometimes winding fashion, John wrote in stunning poetry and careful wording. John's poem, Dark Night of the Soul, is what I want to talk about because it's one of a larger body of works, and it has the typical erotic language and metaphor of medieval time. Yet if you allow the poem to sink in, and you can find this on the internet, John tells of an encounter with the beloved, who is Christ. John leaves his house at night under the cover of darkness when the house is at rest. And yearning, seeking Jesus, the light in John's heart serves as his only guide. His heart guides him to where he finds Jesus asleep. There, John himself, absent speech or question, finds that he is completely at rest with his Lord, and John is lost in oblivion. The dark night of the soul is a place where, guided by the light of my heart, I too can meet Jesus. Rather than being a place where the soul is lacking in faith or the spirit is flagging and weak, in the dark night of the soul, I can rest in him. You know, most often a current and common understanding of the dark night of the soul, when people toss around that phrase, is that it is a time of insomnia. When we wake up at night worrying about what we have left unattended, or we try to deal with and solve what is bothering us. Many people speak of the dark night of the soul as a time of contemplating loss or deep distress, a time where we experience doubt. Yet, if we are walking the path of Nicodemus or John of the Cross, the dark night is a safe place for our souls. Under cover of darkness, our deepest yearnings are connection with Jesus, and we are given answers to questions that we do not know how nor dare to ask. The unexpectedness of all of this fulfills our deep desires and brings us to the place of peace. Modern-day mystics, now 500 years after John of the Cross, modern-day mystics describe the dark night of the soul as a place of new birth or rebirth. In this place, that would be limiting. Our limits are put aside in order to interpret the world from a place beyond words and linear thought. And what better time for this than the liminal times of night? What I see in this encounter in our gospel between Jesus and Nicodemus is a liminal time with an invitation for Nicodemus to go much deeper. Jesus invites him to the spiritual new birth, which defies logic and turns Nicodemus toward faith. As Jesus tells him, the wind blows where it chooses and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. Jesus is speaking of that elusive aspect of faith that is so counter to our human desire for control. Exploring our faith is part of our ongoing journey. We focus in on this at Lent, yet it is our daily calling as God's people to seek a greater connection and an understanding of God, to find God in our neighbor and those right here in this community, and to live into our calling out in the larger world as we encounter different people living in different contexts. The dark night is a way for us to pause in the challenges of our calling, to rest in that beautiful, beautiful time, the time when parents nurse babies and simple truths are laid bare, and be at one with Jesus. So may it be. Amen.